Hello again. Welcome to what will be my third installment of my weekly WoW recap series. Though there isn't as much to talk about this week, there's still a handful of things that have happened in the past 7 days. As usual, I'll be dividing the video into 3 parts: the tech talk, patches and hotfixes, and my week in WoW. I'll be honest, it's getting harder and harder to get footage for these tech talks, not because there aren't any to talk about, but because you generally need the right classes in the right dungeons to pull these off. But despite that, I still have 3 quick tech talks to discuss this week, and I plan on having 3 every week. The first tech talk is in Halls of Valor. This one is about a mob you will only see once throughout the dungeon, the Valarjar Aspirant. I guess you could call it a mini-boss. Is a mob that you encounter before Solston and Olmir, the 2 mini-bosses that precede Herja, the second boss. The Aspirant has an ability called Valkyria's Advance, where she selects a random ranged party member and jumps to their location. Normally, this drags her out of the pack, causing some DPS downtime for melee DPS. As a result, this usually causes her to die slower than the other mobs around her. There is a trick here. If she targets you, while she's preparing to jump, she casts, you can jump off the ledge and break line of sight. If you are out of line of sight when she finishes her cast, she will cancel her leap entirely. This results in a higher uptime, and should be a faster kill. And generally, I think the DPS downtime for you is worth it for the rest of the party. This does not put the leap on cooldown, so she'll almost always try to cast it again right after, so be careful of this. I suppose dropping combat with techniques such as Shadow Meld or Feign Death could also break the jump, as long as you do it before she finishes her cast. The second tech talk is about the Azure Vaults. This one I can only demonstrate partially, as while we did attempt it, only I successfully crossed the chasm. One of the hunters walked slightly too close to the Mind-Soothed mob and pulled. But if done correctly, the whole party could go across no problem. Let me elaborate. On the book platform before the third boss are 2 Drakonid breakers. These breakers guard the book that takes you to the third and fourth boss. However, these breakers have a lot of health and do a lot of damage, especially on fortified weeks. Sometimes their shouts can take out half of your entire party's health. If you have a priest, and given that you have planned ahead so you don't require them for count, you can use Mind Soothe on them. Walk along the rim of the platform and click the book from behind them. It's a fairly easy skip. You just have to be aware of the aggro range of mobs that are Mind Soothed. Their aggro range would be reduced, but it's not 0. As mentioned earlier, in this clip I managed to walk through without pulling thread. But I can't say the same about my party. The hunter pulled aggro, and in turn passed that aggro on to the other players, causing everyone to die. There is another skip to go from the second boss to the third boss, and I'm sure you might have heard of it. It's fairly popular in lower keys and in pugs. I don't have footage of it at the moment, so I'll share it in a future tech talk. The third and final tech talk this week is about Court of Stars. In Court of Stars, at the end of the dungeon, is the little spy finding minigame where you collect clues from 5 partygoers to ascertain the identity of the spy. This can be fairly time consuming, and at higher keys can cost you minutes on your timer just searching. There are a couple of ways to significantly shorten the time taken to find the spy. The first and most well known is through Demon Hunter's ability Spectral Sight. This ability reveals a demon silhouette around the spy, but is only available after you've obtained all 5 clues. While faster to identify the correct spy, this does not really shorten the time it takes to find the clues. The second and arguably better method is using the Paladin artifact appearance from Legion. Protection Paladins have an artifact shield that you can transmog to any shield. This shield glows brightly when you are near a demon, and since the demon is within any of the 4 packs in the room, all the Paladin has to do is walk up to each group one by one, and once the shield lights up, everyone talks to a different guest. One of your 4 guesses will be correct. And it's that easy. You can find the spy without having to get any clues, or try and look for the right items. The best part is, and this is important, is that every Paladin can do this. Even though Retribution Paladin, for example, uses a 2-hander, all they have to do is change their weapon mid-run, as long as they have it transmogged beforehand. Not too long ago, I think at Shadowlands, they made it so you could change weapons mid-M+ run. So there really is no limitation. If you have a Paladin in your group, you can do this. So after you get the right guest, all the Paladin has to do is swap back to their 2-hander. It's really neat. That's it for the tech and dungeon trivia this week. Let's talk about the developments in WoW. There are a few hotfixes from the past week and some updates on patch 10.1 and 10.07. Most notably, 10.07 is coming out tomorrow. First is nerfs to Raszageth. A few hefty nerfs were applied this week to both heroic and mythic Raszageth, reducing the damage of several abilities, as well as a reduction of the absorb shield Raszageth receives in Phase 2. This makes the boss considerably easier, so if you're in an AOTC guild or are looking to get AOTC, now is the time to do it. And though there are no official dates, I suspect the patch to be over in about 6 to 8 weeks, so get it soon. The Azure Vault has received a few nerfs in a recent hotfix. The dungeon timer has been extended by 1 minute and 30 seconds, making it a total of 45 minutes and 30 seconds. The Vault guards, near the Azure Blade boss, now cast Brilliant Scales less frequently. And finally, for Azure Blade herself, the second boss in the dungeon. Azure Blade's mana drains more slowly over the fight's duration. Just to elaborate further, when the boss's mana goes to 0, she will start walking towards the middle of the room and begin her intermission. Overwhelming energy. The nerf just means that she will cast it less frequently. A thing to note is that while it does extend the fight, it doesn't cause the boss to summon another ad. So this is really a pure nerf. There is basically no upsides for Azure Blade here. There's a few more things on the agenda. Other news include a reveal of the Season 2 dungeon timers, with, unsurprisingly, most of the remaining 4 Dragonflight dungeons having fairly long timers. They're at least 35 minutes long and can go up to 40 minutes in the case of Uldaman. The community never likes long dungeons, though I will say I am rather indifferent about long dungeons. Sure, they could feel bad if you mess up at the end, but successfully pulling off a long dungeon does feel slightly more satisfying to me. A new set of development notes have been released for 10.1 PTR, including sizable changes to several classes, including one that I, as well as a few others, are keeping my eye close on: Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest just can't stop getting reworks, huh? These changes are fairly massive and considerably change the way Shadow Priest plays in Season 2. The devs have described their intention to present multiple different archetypes for Shadow to use, and I think in that regard they have done okay. One build in particular focuses on the critical chance and damage of the build. It's one that I'm quite interested in, due to my stat distribution. Discipline Priest's main stats are haste and crit, so I have a fairly high crit stat, whereas Shadow Priests normally take haste mastery. And so when I'm off spec, I don't have to change my stats, I can use my haste crit build. Definitely cautiously optimistic about that build. There were no changes to Mage, which is unfortunate, but honestly, I'm still fairly engaged with the current Fire Mage playstyle. But I can understand why other Fire Mages are disappointed, as the class hasn't received a significant change for a long time. Sun King's Blessing and Pyroclasm are pain points, and they make it so that you have to hardcast Pyroblast during Combust. And that may not always be a good feeling. I don't think it's too bad. Maybe if they make Pyroblast cast faster during Combustion, it would make it feel less bad. These Pyroblast hardcasts are like a little break in your Combustion when it's super hectic, you know? Sometimes it's nice to have. Finally, and most excitingly, is the reveal of all 10.1 set bonuses. These are initial looks, and they are subject to change. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but they are fairly disappointing. Or at least, the set bonuses for the classes I play are disappointing. Shadow Priest's 4 set spawns a Mindbender or Shadow Fiend for 5 seconds every 400 insanity you spend. That's fairly lame. It reminds me of Shadowlands Paladin's Seraphim, where you had a chance to get 3 seconds of it when doing stuff. I can't remember exactly how it worked, but when I got the proc, by the time I realized I had it and tried to use a hard-hitting ability to capitalize on it, the proc was already gone. So I'm scared something like that will happen with the Shadow Fiends. Though 5 seconds is not quite as short as 3 seconds, so I'll wait and see how that turns out when I actually play it. Fire Mage's set bonus feels pretty bad, as it takes a while to build 30 stacks of the 4 set bonus, and the payoff isn't really appealing either. I think Hypothermia may have potential in Flamestrike builds, as Flamestrike is fairly more difficult to instant cast than Pyroblast. But the current Fire Mage builds don't use Flamestrike, and Fire Mage loses a fair amount of single target damage if they take Flamestrike. It's kinda they want us to change our talent build and our rotation without making amends to the pain points of running Flamestrike. And finally, the Vengeance Demon Hunter set looks just fine. Adding another way to apply their defensive is definitely a good thing, and with a talent that causes enemies affected by Fiery Brand to take like 40% more damage, it definitely has potential to both increase the damage and survivability of Demon Hunters. It will likely cause Demon Hunters to have a different talent tree from the one we see primarily used in Season 1. That's all the updates I have for you this week, and now we come to the last section, the section about my week in WoW. I do have a few things I want to talk about. The first is progress on the Dragonflight Season 2 guides. I've finished 4 scripts, all the remaining Dragonflight dungeons, and man, they are long and difficult. There are a lot of enemies, and they all have so many abilities. Yeah, there are expected nerfs and changes to these mobs and bosses, but I think a lot has to change before they can be player-friendly. As the Mythic Plus timer suggests, they are also fairly lengthy, so the dungeon guides will follow that pattern. They'll be quite long, but I'll try my best to keep them as short as I can. As for running dungeons, this week has been pretty quiet. Several members of my normal group have sort of taken the week off, in part because some of them want to play and test the Diablo 4 Alpha. The Alpha seems interesting, and a fair number of people in my guild have tried it out, and they all seem to find it pretty fun. And that does seem to line up with the general reception of Diablo 4 online. I'm not a huge Diablo nerd myself, but I'm always happy to see people enjoy games, be it WoW or Diablo. Now for the fun part. I enjoy discussions. I might not always get responses to my discussions, but I like to talk about it. This week I'd like to talk about Vengeance Demon Hunter. You know, when you look online, there isn't very much discourse about Demon Hunter tanks, or even Demon Hunter DPS, other than the generalizations made about people who play the spec, of course. Vengeance Demon Hunter isn't at the top nor bottom of any tank tier list you see around, and so people are just kind of indifferent to it. You will always get the most discourse and complaining about the very top or very bottom specs. Not to mention, Vengeance's playstyle is fairly different to other tanks, maybe sharing the most resemblance to Blood Death Knight. You heal for a portion of your damage taken in the last few seconds through the soul mechanic. Additionally, Vengeance Demon Hunter has a fairly low uptime on mitigation. Demon Spikes isn't a fantastic defensive, and Fiery Brand is a single target mitigation ability that has a 60-second cooldown. And so, Vengeance must rely on 2 things to keep them tanky: Metamorphosis and Frailty. But because of the fairly low uptime on meta, Vengeance Demon Hunters may find themselves feeling like paper at times, and as a result they may need to kite mobs. This becomes more and more apparent the higher you go in key level. This variation in mitigation availability makes it more important for Demon Hunters to recognize when they will take damage. I think all of these features generally makes Vengeance Demon Hunter a not very appealing class to play. It seems there's too much work involved for not as much reward as an easier class like, say, Prot Warrior, that has so many defensives and so much survivability you just cannot compare. Or even Prot Paladin, who has so much survivability and group utility as a payoff to its complexity. The hardest skill a tank must nurture, in my opinion, is the knowledge of when it is okay to sit and face tank and when to run away. Usually it's fairly obvious, but sometimes you stand in front of a mob and you feel like a rock, you unkillable. You don't pay attention to the enemy's abilities, you don't notice your metamorphosis is running out, and within a second, boom, you're just dead. Before you even realize what's happening, you got tank busted and you're dead. Though Demon Hunters do have a little extra life through cheat death once every 8 seconds if you talent into it. So you can make a mistake here and there. I suppose all tanks require a fair bit of attention to this detail, but it just feels like Demon Hunters are punished more for not noticing it. You have to keep your guard up at all times and be in deep focus to kite at any moment's notice. These are just what I feel are the weaknesses of the Vengeance Demon Hunter as a tank. Of course, one of its strengths is that it does quite a bit of damage in AoE and a reasonable amount of damage in single target, and it isn't too hard to pull off the good numbers as a tank. I enjoy having to think about my routes and my planning more than I have to worry about the minute-to-minute gameplay of a tank. I think that's something that I prefer in my tanks. Just a short, really ramble. That's all I have to discuss this week. I appreciate it if you stayed all the way till the end, and I hope you have a nice M+ this week. The following week's affixes are Fortified, Spiteful, and Grievous. Not the worst week, but I definitely say not the best. Spiteful is never good for melee DPS, and there's going to be a lot of burden on your healers next week because people just love to eat Spiteful Shades melees. Leave a like or subscribe if you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in my next weekly WoW Diary.